Welcome, everybody, to the Heart of the Artist. I am so excited to talk with our guest today. But first, before we do that, I want to point out my co host over there, Catalyst. What's up, my girl?
Hello.
Hi, there you are. So, before we were on camera or off camera or off recording a moment ago, you had never met our guest today. Shannon Lockhart, had you? This was your first moment of meeting her, right?
Yes, this is my first time. I'm so excited.
Well, everybody is in for a treat. Shannon is an amazing poet, and I met her for the first time the other day in a Tesoro takeover of another show and got to hear your poetry, Shannon. And I was so struck by your point of view. You have this amazing, strong point of view, and you deal with some really important subjects and topics. So let's let's jump right in. Tell us who you are and how you came to get into the poetry scene, and tell us all about you.
Let's see. How many hours do you have now? Just kidding.
As many as it takes.
So my name is Shannon Lockhart. I actually grew up in Louisville, Kentucky, and that is where I currently am. However, I lived for about 11 years in Chicago. That's where I went to school. And then I lived for almost a year in El Salvador and 12 years in Guatemala. So, what you need to know about me, number one, I went through desegregation in my city, which means riding on a bus as a 7-year-old just wanting to go to school. We had the Klan stop our bus by burning tires in the streets. We had people throwing rocks at us. And then that same year, went to Europe and went to Anne Frank's house, went to concentration camp. So just was at a very young age struck by these, we're all people, we all get along, except for all these people and these people and these people. I mean, I had to ride to school with police on the bus. So there were lots of things that shaped my world, and so that really led me into a deeper dive into social justice and this sort of like, I don't understand what's going on. And so even as a young child, poetry became my way of wrestling with what I don't understand. This what is going on here. Why is the world like this? Why is this so hard? So I am a therapist, clinical social worker. So that's partly what I do. And I've always been fascinated with that intersection between mental health, human rights, and creativity. And I've learned that, at least for me, in facing some of the issues that I've faced and in walking with people, because I lived in a community of folks who had escaped genocide in Guatemala, an indigenous community, and then worked with many others in multiple languages, and learned that the only way to accompany people through their pain is to share it. But in sharing it, so that it doesn't stay with us, we have to release it. And one of the things that I kept hearing over and over, and part of the project that I worked on in Guatemala was actually called the Recovery of Historic Memory. So this whole idea of, if we don't know our history, we are doomed to repeat it. And that really resonated with me growing up in Kentucky, where we are repeating our history over and over and over, and I was involved in the uprising after the death of Breonna Taylor, and was part of a group called Therapists for Protester Wellness. And so we were going down to Injustice Square and trying to work with the protesters, work with activists to keep them going, giving them the tools that they needed to continue to work for social change. But, what I've consistently heard from people is, don't forget us. Don't forget our stories. Please don't, please tell other people about us. And so that's really stayed with me. And so in my own personal therapy, after escaping, we had death threats against us in Guatemala multiple times. But it was the point when I was pregnant with my second child, my youngest, and the German consul, not the U.S. embassy, the German consul general came to us and said, "Y'all are really in danger. You need to get out now." So okay, can I have my baby first? So we kind of laid low, very quietly packed everything up, had my baby, got his or their papers, and then very quickly came back to the US, which is how I ended up back here, and decided I couldn't ethically see clients while I was still dealing with the aftermath of we just fled for our lives, right? And just dealing with I made a commitment to these people to be with them, and now I've just used my privilege and waltzed out of the country, with a Guatemalan husband and Guatemalan children. So in my own therapy process, I really dug back into poetry, and it started coming out bilingually. It started just, the stories, my stories, the stories of particularly the women that I worked with just started pouring out spontaneously, along with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of drawings. So I also am a visual artist, right? So just to kind of give so this is a book that I self-published, but the drawing there is also mine. So it gives you an idea of sort of some of the art that I do. It's chalk pastel. It's very intuitive. I don't ever sketch anything. I never plan anything. Often poems will show up in the middle of the drawing as well. And so, yeah, that's who I am. I just go with my intuition.
So I
Yeah.
love this. You have given us a meal, and I'm going to start like digging into this meal piece by piece. So take me back, all right, back to the beginning, back to Louisville, and help me understand the construct. My perception of Louisville is that you have a very sort of stratified society because that's the center of Kentucky bluegrass and horse racing. So you have this whole community built around horse racing. I'm a horse person, so I've kind of been adjacent to some of that. And so you've got tremendous wealth. And then you have the individuals who work within that industry, jockeys, barn help, exercise riders, all of that, who they themselves are not halves, but they're attached to all of that. It seems like it's a very stratified place. What was your experience of all of that?
I mean, so it's stratified, in terms of class. It's also in terms of race, right? And there is a very clear divide at East End, West End. East End is where the white folk live, the wealthy, the privileged, the good, so we were taught. And the West End and the South End, the West End is where Black community lives. South End is where immigrants, or just lower economic white folks live. As a child, I was born in the East End. My parents were very clear, although very liberal in some ways, very clear, we got to be careful in the West End, right? But of course, my first experience of school was having school in the West End. That was part of desegregation. It was to really, mix up East and West, and I thought it was great. And actually, yeah, I couldn't understand. It's like, why aren't we all excited about everybody learning? So my school experience was integrated, but I could feel the tension. You're right in terms of also, we are known for all three vices, right? We got the gambling, we got tobacco, we got bourbon. So, I grew up in the city of three vices, very liberal in certain respects and very, very conservative in others, right? And so, and even within my own family, moving in between those different, very diverse, very conflicting perspectives. And interestingly enough, now as a therapist, part of what I do is a lot of the folks in the backside of Churchill Downs are immigrants, and particularly from Guatemala, right? So I find a lot of comfort, and I've worked with folks to help with immigration evaluations because, to try and help people to obtain papers, right? To go through the processes, the legal channels that they need to. Actually, with a family on September 4th, I'm going to be testifying on behalf of a family who is actually in the horse industry, who would like to stay here but is in danger of being split. It's a mixed mixed status family. Some are
Mhm.
citizens, others are not. Um, so, I guess I grew up and this is what I love about poetry in particular, this tension about I don't even know if we have the words to explain this. Like, and I remember saying, but I still don't understand. Like, explain it to me again. I don't understand this. I loved my school in the West End. I loved the kids. I didn't understand, and nobody could ever explain to me. And so part of why I also write bilingually, besides just that's how I've lived my life, is really trying to push the limits of and extract meaning from words that otherwise seem flat, to try and grapple with all of these contradictions. Yeah.
As we're sitting here talking and I'm listening to you, the idea occurred to me that this horse industry propagates these limited gender roles because you are in a society that venerates the stallion and venerates male energy. Everything is all about the guys, right? I mean,
Yep.
sure, oh, she's such a good broodmare. That broodmare line is so great, but it's all about the stallion and stud fees. It's all about this male energy. How does that permeate society and sort of permeate your societal learning? And does having that sort of male dominated construct also create a very limiting view of class differences and also racial differences? If you're limited in one area, are you limited everywhere else? Probably.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And on top of it, Louisville is a very Catholic place. So again, you have this sense of patriarchy, hierarchy, reinforced. So actually, it's interesting because that is definitely, that was one of my interests in Guatemala, was going to work with women, Indigenous women, right? And just being part of that. And it's something I didn't feel like I could do here. I actually switched. I went to public school all the way up until high school. And then I had been in 8 schools because they kept changing the desegregation plan. So 6 schools in 8 years. And so I was just like, you know what? I want to be at one. I don't want to keep switching high schools. Like, I want one set of friends for once and not having them everywhere. Um, so I went to the local Catholic girls' schools. So that was actually the first place where, there were, I think, 3 male or 4 male teachers, being in an all female, all femme space. The first time it's like, people are listening to me when I open my mouth. Like, whoa, it was so different from public school. And so yeah, and I grew up with an older brother, right? So he was the first, he's the boy, he's the brother. I remember lots of times that was also part of the thing, well, boys can do this but girls can't. Well, why can't I? Right? He got to stay out later as a curfew because it was safe for him, but I couldn't because how boys can be, it wouldn't be safe for me. And so just grappling with that. And in Guatemala, that was very similar in many ways. But because I moved within the human rights community, and particularly within these spaces that had been formed by and were led by a lot of women, it really helped me to find a place where I had a voice. But I feel like I've had to be a chameleon, and I've for many years felt like it's not safe. It's not safe to say what I think. It's not safe to do what I do. It's not safe for people to know. So I know how to play the part.
So you were a rebel thinker from way back.
Oh, always. Yes.
Yeah.
I was always getting in trouble. I remember actually when I stood up, they were doing hearings about women in the church. And could women be so the bishops held, public hearings. Could women become priests? I gave my opinion and said, I don't know why not. I mean, I don't know why a penis is so particularly important to being able to lead people in a service. And yeah, that did not go over well. I got yanked into the principal's office. You didn't say
you,
what school you were
you
at,
and
right?
Jake spoken word and
Just like,
Catholic school.
dang.
Like a whole show on its own.
Front page of the Catholic Church paper, the local archdiocesan paper, 17-year-old, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Yeah, always getting in trouble. Always. Or just on the edge, right, of getting in trouble. And so, and that I guess that's also part of what my fascination with other languages, because in Spanish I could be whoever I wanted to be. Nobody knew who I was in English. Nobody knew, so being in this whole other environment is like, I can reinvent myself. Nobody knows me. Nobody can tell me who I'm supposed to be. And I will say too, I grew up under the shadow. My dad is a brilliant artist. He is well known in our town, which is great. But when I showed some talent for art very early on, well-meaning adults would say things like, well, it's because of your dad, you know. And that did not sit well with me, because it was just like, but I'm me. I'm not him. I'm me. I have my own style, my own. And that was really hard for me. So for a long time, I actually didn't do art. And that was another reason why I got into poetry. It's like, well, nobody in my family writes. So that's one place nobody will compare me, right? I could be me, and there's nobody else to say, oh, well, it's because so and so. So while I'm grateful to my dad, and the fostering of the visual art part, yeah, I really found who I was by moving into poetry, which then led me back to some of the visual, and which just kind of keeps me moving through whatever's channeled out of me at any given time. And I never know, and I never planned it. So almost all of what I write are first draft. If I need to write, I do. If I don't, I don't.
So you're this rebel thinker from the outset, which is supported and encouraged by very free thinking parents. And I'm sure they're so proud of you for being that individual. And obviously going through a lot of tumult with all of this change in the schools and these negative influences. Did you feel angry at that time? Do you remember feeling anger about what was going on?
Yeah, I feel like there was a voice in my head that never stopped crying out, it's just not fair. Why is it so unfair? Right. And I think that's what really drove me into activism, because it's like, well, if it's not fair, we got to do something about it. But I feel like that was sort of the drive in everything I do, right? Is it's not fair. Well, then we need to make it fair. I can't just complain about it. I got to do something. Right.
Walk the walk. Walk the
Yeah.
walk.
Yeah,
That talk, yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
So you finished high school at the Catholic school, and then what was next?
So that was when I went up to Chicago, where I got a degree in English Lit and theology. So I studied theology with the Jesuits, and again, it was a lot of, but why? But why did the church say that? But why can't women this? But why do they? I drove them crazy in a good way, I think. I hope. I think I did. Certainly got under their skin, because they were all Jesuit priests. So
Well, they need to answer those questions. So good for you for asking them.
right. I was always the, hand up, hand up, hand up kind of person. So then from there, I actually had a pretty transformative experience. So right after graduation, I did a volunteer year with 13 other folks at a place called a Mate House. It was run by the Archdiocese of Chicago, where we each lived we lived in community together. We were given we lived in an old convent, and we had these donated cars. So we would each go off to volunteer sites and do a year of volunteer service. So I ended up at this school called Josephinum High School. It was right on the lines between the Latin Kings and Spanish Cobras. The local public school right down the street was one of the most dangerous and notorious ones. So this school was actually not sort of a traditional Catholic school. It was more of a safe haven for young girls, immigrants, and also immigrants, primarily from Mexico, a few from Central America, and then also Black girls, right, who were afraid of the gangs in the public school. So most of them got there on scholarship. And since I had the English Lit major, even though I didn't want to teach and didn't know how to teach, they said, hey, you get to teach freshman English. Okay. And hey, we want you to teach autobiography, and Maya Angelou's book is going to be, so I find myself teaching these girls. I know why the cage bird sings, going, I don't know why. I don't know how I got here. I don't know what I'm doing. And it was really incredible. We all learned together, but I also realized that as much as I ended up liking teaching is not for me, because I could see all the barriers to learning. And that's what really drove me into clinical social work. It's like, I want to know these girls' stories. That was the best part about teaching, was we did autobiography. So girls were really diving into, and sort of using Maya Angelou's book to sort of jump off into the deep end of their own lives, and what is this about, and who am I, and how do I, resonate in this world.
You got
And
to
how do
do
I find my
writing
voice
as
in this world?
therapy. You got to do writing as therapy with young women. What
I did.
like, wow.
And it was like, whoa, I could actually get paid to do real therapy. And so getting my master's in clinical social work, I again was kind of the rebel, but wait a minute, what do you mean we get to test out of cultural competency class? What do you mean you're not going to make us actually sit through this class and really dive into some of these issues, right? And especially coming out of Kentucky, I was like, y'all, there are issues, big issues. So I asked the dean at the time to put his money where his mouth was. I said, I want to learn Spanish because we don't have enough therapists for Spanish speakers. And there's a language school down in Guatemala. So can y'all send me? So he actually wrote a letter. So the faculty pooled together money, got me down to Central America, where I learned Spanish, and then actually ended up living and working for a time in El Salvador right after the war ended. So I lived in a community that had been built on a garbage dump, that the landfill, they had just put dirt over the landfill and then built houses for these internally displaced folks. So I ended up kind of overseeing and helping out in the daycare of kids who had been born in the camp, the internal camp.
Hold the phone. So they've literally built a neighborhood on top of a landfill. What was the water supply? That's got to be toxic.
Yeah, it was toxic. Yes. Everybody had rashes, including me. People got sick all the time. There was, water was everybody took turns with a hose, and everybody had sort of a cistern that you'd fill up once every other day, right? So you'd tie your hose in the order, and then when the water turned on once a day, then everybody'd fill up their water. They were still demining the area, so there were UN helicopters and teams looking for landmines. One of the kiddos in the daycare found a grenade. He was a 3-year-old. He brought it home. He pulled the pin and blew up his family. So these are the kinds of stories that I have lived with. And so for me, writing and channeling some of the anger at the injustice, and also channeling the stories and the strength and the beauty that often goes unseen, because we're into trauma porn and poverty porn, and so we don't see the people. We see the poor, the Blacks, the immigrants, and so wanting to push back at that and say these are incredible people if you actually sit and get to know them. And so that idea of accompanying people, either through writing or through therapeutic processes or through marching in the street with them, just that's who I It's just what I do. Even, in Louisville now, I belong to this radical little church of people who are kind of on their the last stop before no religion, right? We're really committed to the sense of community. I'm actually wearing a shirt from it. The Urban Goat Walker Coffee House is one of the projects that was started there 30 years ago.
You were going to say that's the name of the church, and I was like,
wow,
no, go there.
It's not, but yeah, that would not. But it's held at the church. So once a month, we drive around and pick folks up in the shelters, and they come back to these lovely little candle lit with actual real cloth tablecloths. It's an open mic. We bring extra instruments. We bring, good coffee, good desserts, all free. And it's just a place to share. And that was what was missing in my life, because growing up with a father who was pretty famous as an artist, I grew up with the idea that art is for the rich. That going back to that classist divide. Yes, we went to Actors Theater. I grew up going to the Louisville Ballet, the orchestra, the Super Pops. I had access to all those things. Most people didn't, and I knew that, right? And again, I had the question of, but why do we have to dress up to see art? Why do we have to dress up to go here? Why does this cost so much money, and why can't everybody go? So when I thought, and we joined the church because of the open mic. It's like, if that's what they do, that's where we want. Those are our people, right? This whole idea of this is a safe, supportive environment, and anything anybody has to share is absolutely worth listening to. There's nobody saying, this person doesn't have a great voice. I mean, it's so encouraging. It's so amazing. It's wonderful to be in this mixed community of folks who happen to be houseless and folks who don't. And it's like, this is the community I want my kids to grow up in. I want them to not be looking for these differences. I want us to sit down together. And it's great because my kids, when they were little, they'd see somebody, hanging out in the park, who was most likely houseless, and they would immediately find some food in the house and, hey, sit down. Not just give them something, but it was like, sit down, how you doing, what's your name, I'm so and so. Did you know that there's this breakfast program down the street? Did you know about Urban Goat Walker? Come share with us. And so that was actually when I finally had the guts myself to share my own poetry and my own voice. So it wasn't until pretty recently that happened.
What was
that? I had
like?
this.
What was that like? I mean, was it like the dam bursting out of you? Like, please talk about that.
Well, I mean, I do, because it's a family space. I do. I'm very careful about some of what I share. Right? My kids are there listening. They don't need to know all of it. They don't need to hear all of it. But I think it was pretty incredible. I read this one poem about my tattoo. And the room just got really quiet and everybody just focused on me. And I had all these guys coming. I'm like, oh my God, you nailed it. Yes. That's why I got my tattoo too. Like this, like there was just all of a sudden this camaraderie, this like, things that I always knew were true. Like, we're all just people together. We're just peopling. And I don't believe in classism. I believe in radical community. I believe in, breaking the barriers. I believe in accompaniment. I believe we all have something to give and to share. I believe in mutual aid.
The art's building a bridge. I love it.
Yeah, so I am not at all about patriarchy or hierarchy.
So what are your favorite archies? Do you have any favorite archies?
Oh, I can mostly name all the ones that are not mine. I don't know. I don't like labels. I like radical.
You're in good company. There's another person in this room who hates labels.
Like I mean, it's funny because I had a conversation with my almost 18-year-old and he's like, I don't even know why liberal people call us radical. We're just doing basic, obvious things like being nice to people. Like, how can that, how is that radical? Like, and just like even he now is at a point where he recognizes, people who call themselves liberal are actually pretty conservative, especially in Kentucky. And we've been labeled as these really sort of over the top, like rebel. It's like because we read poetry with houseless folks and let them borrow our instruments and listen and cheer them on. Like,
So I want to go back to the haunted church and the jalopy cars and these amazing kids. What was what are like the top things you took away from that period of time?
you mean from when we came back here and settled in with this community?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think the first thing is, and it took us a while, is I actually never thought it was going to be possible to find radical community in Kentucky. Like when I walked away, I walked away. It's like I do not fit in here. I don't have many people. Um, and so that was my fear until we found this community, until we started going to the urban goat walker, and until we found, yeah, these people who had been, I mean, it's been like 32 years now of ever, once a month, except for during the pandemic, right? So it brought me a lot of hope. And, I've been so proud to see how my kids just freely share who they are and are not afraid to be who they are. They're, my youngest shared their authentic self with us a few years back and said, "My name is Lynx and I'm non-binary." And we said, "Okay, cool. Let's go change your name." My oldest brought home his trans male partner, and we said, "Okay, cool. Roll with it." I came out also because I realized at that point, and this is part of being in that radical experience and being in a safe community. When my youngest came out, said, "Mama, how do you identify?" And I went, "Oh shit, I can't lie to my kid." Been lying to myself all my life, but I can't lie to my kid. And that was when I came out. I'm like, actually, I'm queer.
Yes, let's go.
My husband was not thrilled, I have to say. That did not go well. And we are in the process of divorcing.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But got my flag in the back there, got our other flag, and
Let the flags fly. Let them
it,
fly. I
it's
love it.
just, I have to be who I am. I cannot live in this city if I have to choke back who I am.
Living
And I didn't,
inauthentically is toxic to your soul.
and I even remember, I again, in Guatemala, I remember on my wedding day, somebody's like, "So when are you going to take your husband up to become a citizen?" I'm like, "Oh God, never. Are you kidding me? I would never take him to Kentucky with Mitch McConnell." Like, no. And then, of course, to save their lives, yes, that's where we came. And it's been a struggle, but I'm really proud when I see my kids making music. They're both very, very talented. And again, it's just sort of spontaneous, and it's just very real. They're just real people. They're just,
Can
yeah.
can you talk about, and this is, I don't know that I've ever heard this spoken of before, so I would like to know about it if you have a perspective on it. There has to be a lot of emotional trauma for immigrants in this country, having to leave behind what they know, what they love, the people they know, the people they love, to be cut away from their culture and trying to figure out where they fit in all of this, assimilating language, trying to figure out just how to be. What what's that mental health trauma like for them? And what is it
Mm.
like for their children, who I know a lot of times are put into the position of having to be translators and probably exposed to things that are not age appropriate because of that? And just, can you talk about some of that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, even my kids went through it, and I have to say that the culture shock for me of coming back after 12 years gone um, was probably harder than for my husband, because this was all new to him. So for a while, for him, there was this excitement of, "Woo, it's all new." My kids, though, my youngest, I'm sorry, my oldest, my youngest was basically a newborn. My oldest was already 3, bilingual, had, a lot, well, the first thing is, we were out on a walk and he looks around, he's like, "Mama, where'd all the brown people go?" Because he just noticed, right? Like, this
Yeah.
is not Guatemala, right? We are, and we're in a pretty mixed neighborhood. Um, but he noticed immediately. And then I remember one time, so in Guatemala, um, when you go into a restaurant, you say hello to everybody. Like, you basically always acknowledge people's presence, which again, it shouldn't be radical community to do that, but here we try very hard not to look at people or bother them, right? So my 3-year-old, we're at this local seafood restaurant, and like a good Guatemalan child, he's going around to everybody and saying, bon appetit, the Spanish version of bon appetit, which is buen provecho. And you also say thank you to all the people for sort of being part of the dining experience. This is a very polite way to just connect with people on a basic level. And somebody complained to the restaurant manager, you know. And so immediately manager comes over, get your child under control. Now, mind you, he's very politely going around, but just table to table doing what he has been taught to do. And I had to pull him aside and say, "Liam, I'm sorry, but they don't want you walking around the restaurant and talking to people." And he burst into tears. And I don't understand it here. I don't know the rules, Mama. He got in trouble later at school because he was trying to give his friends a kiss on the cheek. So I'm giving you, sort of a window from my own family, but this is common to everybody. This immediate sense of, I don't know what the rules are, and nobody here wants to tell us. They'll just tell us we're wrong, but nobody's there to guide us. And so again, a lot of the work I do with the therapy with immigrants is, first of all, about honoring and remaining true to who you are, who they are authentically. Like, that's got to come first. And we don't talk about assimilation and acculturation. We talk about the kinds of things we need to do to mix in. But no, I don't want anybody to acculturate. That's colonization. No, this is how we got into this mess.
The experience, that those two experiences that Liam had, and I don't know enough about child development to know, but he was doing things that are a part of his family culture. There, he's doing things that are part of who he is, things that he's been taught to do, and then all of a sudden he's criticized. Like, how damaging is that to a child's psychosocial construct, to be like slapped in the face basically for being who they've been taught to be? It feels like that could be incredibly damaging.
Yeah, I mean, Liam ended up getting diagnosed with PTSD, just the trauma of the way the move happened, these rule changes, this being yelled at for things that made no sense. And he'd say, "I don't," echoes of my own childhood, where he'd say, I don't understand. Why is it like this? When are we going to go back to Guatemala, Mama? I want to go home," he'd say, so even years later, when are we going back home? Um, and actually, another Tesoro woman, Linda Tai, she's the one who talks about this idea of sort of traumatic homesickness, right? That you just carry with you. And I feel like, we buried my children's umbilical cords in the jungle. It's a tradition. It's a connection to earth where you grew. And it's been very difficult for them. And for my youngest, it's almost worse because my youngest, they don't have tangible memories. I mean, they're Guatemalan by birth. Um, they grew up in a bilingual home. I've tried to, we've tried to keep the culture going, but their sense of isolation from culture, and this is kind of speaks to that, what about the kids who are born here, right? Lynx wasn't born here, but Lynx carries that, like, I don't know what I'm missing, but I know I'm missing something.
I was
Right?
just about to ask you, is it that where
Yeah.
there's something missing, but you
There's
don't know what it
something,
is?
yeah.
Wow.
And so that's been really hard because Lynx has felt left out. Like, I don't know my people like you all do. I can't talk about these people. I hear you all talking about, compadres and every, tios and primos and everybody. And I don't know these people well enough to know. I don't know what it's like to be a Latino in a fully Latino atmosphere. I don't know what it's like to be somebody indigenous in the midst of a ceremony, So, we have basically kept our kids in therapy, and I work a lot with the oldest children, who've come and had to navigate being the adult when they're not. And just, yeah, it it's not abuse, but it is harmful. It's harmful to have to be the one to worry about navigating systems that are not welcoming, and particularly in a place like Kentucky. Like, my kids and I felt vindicated. We were part of Occupy ICE, where we occupied the space in front of the the Homeland Security office that people had to come and report to. So we have sort of channeled that sense of, we fight when things are unfair and we stand with people, so even as little kids, that's been part of it for them too. So if we don't like it, we work to change it. And this is
What
what
has
we're
it been
going
like
to
for
do.
you as a mom to see your children go through these things?
I think the hardest thing I ever did in my life was to rip my children away from their homeland. That decision as a parent of that sense of, I know what they're going to be losing, but I don't want them to die. And I also felt like, I don't know how to, if we had stayed and one of us, my husband or I, had been killed, or God forbid the kids, I also knew I couldn't forgive myself. I mean, it felt like an impossible situation, and that was the hardest decision I ever made. And I have never really been able to fully put down the guilt of subjecting my children to this country when that was never the plan. Obviously there are some good things that have come of it, but I never thought I'd leave Guatemala. I never wanted my kids to leave Guatemala. And it's been hard to watch friends who did stay in Guatemala, and just, other couples that were mixed. We just weren't safe. And it's like, that's the other part of it. Like, why us? Well, I know why. I mean, my husband was an investigative journalist. He was investigating the ties between Guatemalan government and the cartels. I did human rights work. I, did lots of translations of declassified documents, among other things. I was there when we were digging up forensic evidence that ended up being parts of, evidence for the trial of the genocide trials. I heard testimonies. I helped prepare people to begin to, and I didn't do the sort of later stuff, but the very beginning of, how do we even start to talk about genocide when anybody who talked about it before is now dead, right? How do we begin to reconcile Yeah, just that parallel of learning to overcome fear to speak your truth, right? And I
And those are
ultimately ended up,
experiences that your kids didn't have and don't really have frame of reference to understand the dire nature of any of that. They will one day.
well, we've had a pretty open conversation that's been age appropriate and mostly guided by the kids. Little by little, we've been telling them parts of their story,
Mhm.
parts of my story, parts of just the story of Guatemala. What happened? What was the genocide? Um, they have a right to know who they are. And they have a right to understand some of the intergenerational trauma too that's been passed down through them, and our desire to heal, but also giving them that permission to continue to heal for themselves, but also for if and when they have children. So intergenerational trauma and healing and speaking your truth and being validated, even if it's not how I feel, right? Like really trying to work through that with them.
Yeah.
And they hear my poetry. They have, they know that that's my way of just trying to speak my truth.
And since
So,
we are talking about poetry, I would love to give you the opportunity to share some poems across the spectrum of these experiences that you have so powerfully laid out for us.
okay, let's see. Um, so this is one that I really like. It is bilingual. Um, this is about how I felt moving back to the US, and it's called Floating. My passion for life is probably floating somewhere over Septima Avenida, or perhaps in Las Margaritas Dos, in the milpas or the burning glow of the leña. It never came through customs. I never itemized what I lost. I didn't write down what I brought with me. I declared nothing because even though I have things to give and I want to give them, even when I want to unwrap the present and find myself still here, the vibrancy has escaped me. I want to inhale the smoke around the fogata. I need that. It wakes me up and soothes me. It means home. I want those intense colors back, the fuchsia of the bougainvillea, the orange and purple birds of paradise, the red and green quetzal. I want the pungent smell of cardamom, the musty, sticky, deep orange of the achiote bush. I need to wrap myself in the sweat of walking through the mud in the jungle, just to swing in your hammock and sit by your fire. I want to savor the earthy smell of bodies fed by corn. I never tucked those things in my morale, never knew I would need to bring them. I declared nothing on my forms, and my passion is stuck floating somewhere near the volcanoes.
Wow. I'm I'm so glad that I had all of that amazing context with which to really experience that poem. I mean, I felt that pain, especially in the section we were talking about the colors. I felt like I was seeing the colors and bougainvillea in particular because I love bougainvillea. It's so beautiful. And it strikes me, it makes me wonder if you had stayed, if things had worked out for some reason that you could stay, could you all be in the space that you are now of living authentic selves of you and your kids and just being your real true authentic, these parts of you that have come out.
Hmm. I mean, in some ways, I feel like I was my authentic self in Guatemala. And so it's been, how do I continue to do that in a culture that doesn't want that? Again, that very hierarchical, rigid structure. Um, at some point, I think that would have stopped in Guatemala just because my mental health got so bad. Just the idea of at any time, you know, who might shoot us, who might, you know, I mean, we had friends murdered. I will never forget my my oldest Liam when he was 18 months old. We were on our way into the city to work, and it was a time when the gangs were killing bus drivers pretty regularly because the bus drivers were refusing to carry drugs on the buses, right, to transport. So we pulled up at a stoplight and we thought the bus next to us was also just stopped at the intersection. And then my kids start screaming and we look and the driver was dead and hanging out
Oh God.
the window. And that was like right where, and of course we couldn't go anywhere because we're at a stoplight and just, you know, and I was just past it, but it was right at, you know, and I don't think my kid has ever gotten over that. You know, he had night terrors for years, and that was before he was really, you know, and also my husband's boss is in jail. Shouldn't be in jail. The International Human Rights Court has said shouldn't be in jail, but corrupt judicial system has put him in jail. So I don't know that we would have been able to continue to be who we are in that way because it would have, you know, our worlds, our circle, they were closing it. I mean, my phone was tapped all 12 years of it there. Like, people knew who I was, what I did. They knew who my husband was and what he did. So for whatever reason, the transition had to happen, I think, for my kids to survive. And so my job as a mom is to help them thrive. So they need to see me thrive. And so on the days when I just don't know how, I think of them. It's like, I've got to find a way to thrive. And also be able to find a way to tell them today is not my best day.
Mm-hmm.
But I've learned to do that with clients too, like just learning to be transparent and just today is not my best day. I'm just showing
Well,
up as I
you
am.
talked earlier about, you know, finding the beauty. How do you find the beauty for yourself? How do you do that? What's your trick?
I don't have a trick. It's pure intuition. So it can be just the way the light catches a leaf. It can be listening to the cicadas. It can be just a feeling that I don't know, you know, that I can't identify. And so that then sometimes becomes the impetus to, well, I'll just write a poem and then I'll figure out what it is I'm feeling. Right? Like
But it
you
sounds like the
can't tell me
nature.
write a poem about this. It will not happen. You can't tell me to draw something. Won't happen.
It sounds like though that nature is
Oh
really
yeah.
important for you to keep your equilibrium and grounded and being out there in the natural world.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it is true. And that was the best part about living out in the jungle. The first year that I was in Guatemala, I was basically outside the whole time. I'm allergic now to most outside, but at least I need to at least be able to see it. But actually, no, one of the things the pandemic did was I started to see clients out in the little park. We have this little private park that's very, you know, no, people don't really know about it. So not many people are there. So I was like, okay, not going to be in an office. I'm immunocompromised, but let's go sit in the park. And so sitting in a park on a blanket and doing therapy like is just as good for me as it is for them. Like, let's kick off our shoes, let's be barefoot, let's really just inhale the grass smells, the watch the bird. I mean, that has been pretty amazing to add that in as a, well, why aren't we always doing this?
I love that. Did you have any interesting jungle encounters when you were over there?
Oh yeah.
Yeah? You gonna
Oh
share?
yeah. Well, so the first thing is I accidentally ate oh shoot, no, um, a kinkajou. I got invited over for meat, which was a scarcity. There was a point in time in this returned refugee community that I lived in for a year. So it was 6 miles from the end of the road to the community, 3 days from the capital, and then a 6 mile hike.
Wow.
No electricity, no water. The river was a mile away. Anyway, food was scarce. We were living off of food rations, that had been given, and then just kind of whatever, learning to forage and stuff. So somebody invited me over for meat, and it was delicious, and I loved it. And then they showed me the little kinkajou head, and I went, "Oh God, I just ate a teddy bear." Like, oh crap. Same thing happened another time, another very, very delicious meat dish, and then they showed me the toucan bill. And oh crap, it's endangered. But the most incredible thing in the jungle was this one day where I hear everybody beating pots and pans. I'm like, this is weird. What's going on? And they're screaming and yelling. This massive ant colony, and by massive, I'm talking probably billions. It was about 6 feet wide, and it just like nothing. They climbed in and around. They went through houses, everything. Just and so the pots and the pans were to try to steer them so that they didn't just go in and through the houses, and to try and steer them sort of through the center of town on their way
So
out.
literally,
But
it was on the move, like the
it was
ants.
literally the most incredible. And if you got too close to them, they'd all swarm you, right? So these are leaf cutting ants. You don't want them. They got really sharp mandibles. I didn't have my camera that day. I have tried looking up videos. Like, part of me is like, did I really witness that? But I mean, it took probably a half an hour for this thing to go through. It was just this beast of, yeah, absolutely
Movable
incredible.
beast.
Amazing.
What about snakes? Any snake encounters?
Oh God, yes. Yeah, oh yeah. So the community I lived in grew cardamom, and the cardamom actually grows, the pods grow sort of close to the ground, right? So, big bushy, foliage, but then you have to kind of, and so snakes like to hide in there, right? So, um, yeah, vipers, coral snakes. We were down at the river one day, and a green viper was just like, poised to, it was on the other bank. We all took off running. I saw it. Somebody actually had walked over it. It had been sleeping, and there were sort of the log steps, and it was under, so they didn't see it, but I saw it from across, and it just reared up its head. I'm like, we gotta get out of here. Yeah, tarantulas, snakes, scorpions, bats, very gigantic things. Oh my God, these centipedes and millipedes that were like this long, like 7-8 inches long, about an inch thick, and venomous. Scary.
How
Like,
did
you
you
don't want
keep
to
these
squish
things
them.
out of your house?
So I slept under my house there was a hut. There were no nails except for the nails nailing the zinc roof. I had one square zinc thing. So they just took saplings and stripped off the bark, and used the bark to just loop them together. So it wasn't exactly a sturdy house, and it wasn't weatherproof in any way. It was just a dirt floor. I always slept underneath mosquito net, and kept all my stuff under there and tucked up so that spiders wouldn't get up in there. I learned to sleep with, my boots facing down. So again, snakes and creepy crawlies couldn't go up into them if you have them tilted, so you never leave them sort of standing up. You always turn
Oh, I
them the
thought
other
you were
way.
saying you slept with them on, and I thought she's smart.
Oh, no. Because you had to wear rubber boots, and God, no, can't keep rubber boots on. Yeah, did not go barefoot anywhere because I did not want to get some of the worms. I mean, I ended up getting parasites and worms all the time, but um, you just kind of learn to roll with it. I mean, thankfully, I had camped like as a kid, and it was like, oh, I've done this before. So it wasn't
It's
that
kind of
different.
interesting because you have all these creatures, right, that just think, hey, there's a tasty treat. And you come home and you don't have any of the creatures, but we have all of these social constructs that are just as dangerous and want to kill you.
Yeah. Yeah, there are a lot of times I think I prefer the creepy crawlies, to be perfectly honest. Well, and that community. I mean, the thing about that I learned about that community, and this also informs everything I do. That was my first experience. There were 80 families of we are literally going to survive together or die together. So there was one point, so another jungle experience. It was actually in March of 1998. There were wildfires out of control
Mm.
in the region I was in, and it got within about 100 yards of my house. It actually jumped the river, and so there was a point where, like, what are we going to do? We have no water. It jumped the river. So they ended up finally, because they had tried to cut enough to keep it from jumping down by the river. Wasn't enough. It jumped over, and they finally got it to stop. But really, 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 really close to the houses. Like that was terrifying, you know. But just really hunkering down and thinking, this is how most of the world actually lives. And most of the world actually lives without the pretense of I can be independent and strong by man. Most of the rest of the people in the world know, you know what? I have extra beans, you have extra firewood. Let's, put it together and we'll just share.
Yeah.
So very, very different concept. I mean, that was the year I really, really had to face myself as a human and all of my bad habits of growing up in the US and growing up, as a privileged white person, and just like and also grappling with how can they be so nice to me? I'm such an asshole. Like, don't they know my country destroyed this country?
I feel like I want you to write a poem called I'm Sorry, Not Sorry, I Ate You, Kinkajou.
Yeah. I do have an I'm not sorry one, but yeah, it's not about the kinkajou. But yeah, I as you can tell, I have never let go of feeling guilty about the kinkajou
Yeah.
because they do not actually eat chickens, and that was the fear, is that the kinkajou was there to eat the chickens. And I understand that, I mean, how would they know otherwise? They just saw an animal they thought was a predator. We were living scarce, and the few chickens that were there
Yeah.
were really important to survival. And they didn't have a lot of meat because the chickens were for eggs, of course.
Yeah.
So I get the impulse, but yeah, part of me. And we also ate possum. We had possum. I've had iguana. We get snails from the river, and we'd put them in chicken bouillon and
Mm-hmm.
then take little pine needles and poke them, and you had to eat
I
tons.
love it.
Little
Escargot.
Well, they're not the big. I mean, we're talking little teeny things.
That's great though.
Just like
You've
little
got some
people.
incredible stories from this time period.
Oh, I do.
Has being back in the States offered um, any of those sort of grand stick out in your memory happy circumstances?
I don't know. I think happiness is something I've always struggled with in general, anywhere I go. Despite trying to find beauty in things, there's always this poignancy about everything, right? And I think I come by it honestly. I mean, I think it's I can't unsee what I've seen. I can't unsee what's happening as it unfolds before us. And so I think more than happiness, I try to look for the beauty, and I think that's why I called my book Wild Beauty, that just this there's a lot more ugliness than beauty, and I don't know that I'll ever actually be happy. But if I can find the beauty and highlight it in some way, even for just a moment, that's important, So,
Well, I would love to hear another poem. I think that would be beautiful.
okay, let's see. Hmm. So many. I think I'll read the one about tattoo. Tattoo. It's about reclaiming myself, reclaiming my body. The pain of the needle frees me from the visceral memories of hands forcing me down, fingers digging in, grabbing, groping. I take control. Today, I decide which memories remain in my body and on my skin. I choose my scar, my vision, a truce with the past, shaking off the memories that haunt. I decide what needs to disappear and take the important pieces with me. The ones that shaped me into someone strong and good. The ones that gently nudge me forward. I mark myself forever by what I need to honor. I will discover its wisdom while I speak my truth and spread my wings.
Yes. That's exactly
So,
how I feel about my future tattoo.
yeah, I didn't know I wanted one. And I woke up one morning 10 years ago and said, well, I know which tattoo I'm getting. And my husband said, what? You don't like tattoos? I said, yeah, I know. I still don't, but I know which one I'm getting. I was very adamant about that. And so it's actually, yeah, you can't really see it,
I love that.
but it is actually a symbol in Guatemala of, so that all shall know, it's a symbol of someone shouting their truth.
Mm-hmm.
And it comes from a photograph that a friend of mine took. So he superimposed an indigenous person shouting over the wings, which are actually shoulder blades dug up from one of the clandestine graves, right, of the forensic anthropologists. So it's
That must
my
have been an
way of sort
incredible
of
moment.
honoring the stories, honoring my truth, honoring other people's truth. I find myself oftentimes before I read, I'll kind of touch base with, yeah, there's a reason we need to be seen, we need to be validated, we need to be heard.
I
We
think
all
it's a
have
really
something to
powerful
share.
moment when you discover the thing that you've been waiting your entire life to put on your body. Like the thing
Mm-hmm.
that spoke to you so much that it has to be a part of your corporeal being.
Yeah, I mean, it's my way of really sort of knowing that Guatemala happened, and it is so much a part of who I am and who I will always be, and who my kids are, and so in some ways it's also for them. It's their legacy as well. So, yeah.
It's one of your flags.
Mm-hmm.
Catalyst wrote a question in the chat. She said, "Have you felt inspired to write a book of your experience?"
I have so many journals that I've kept, you know, people have asked me that before, and part of me says yes, part of me says, why would anybody want to read that? And part of me says, but that's what my poems and art are. It's already out there. My narrative is out there. I'm continuing, and I want to do another book. I know the title. I don't have all the poems, and I don't have a publisher, but it's going to be called Liberation Manifesto, and it's going to be more of the social justice and just telling people stories and insisting on not looking away from, yeah, the way things are. Um, I don't know that I have the discipline to sit down and actually do a narrative, a prose narrative that would feel honest. I don't know. And that may not make sense to you all. That makes sense to me. It's like I'm just me. Um, everybody's got an interesting story. I want to speak about the things that I need to speak about. So I don't necessarily know that I want to tell some of the other stories. I don't want to trivialize it, I guess. I don't want it to turn into a coffee table thing. It's like I have had some incredible experiences in their mind. And I want to share them in the form of art, but I don't know that I want to trivialize them into entertainment, if that makes sense,
I understand that. I do. At the same time, it almost feels like you were placed here to share some of those things because you began experiencing them and cataloging them from the time of being a young child.
Yeah.
And that perspective, I think, of a young child of noticing inequality and racism and hatred and violence, that I think that hits us so hard, um, especially as parents. I think parents really, you know, and yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
If you reconcile yourself to it, I think it would be an incredible thing to share.
Yeah. That was just, I got very, yeah, it just brought me back to actually another formative experience. So my dad, as I said, is a sculptor. So he was asked to do um, a, a, a crucifix for the main cathedral. My family obviously was Catholic. I consider myself a former Catholic. Um, so my dad decided to create this 7-foot statue of Jesus with Palestinian features and dark skin. And then
You decided to be accurate.
right? Yeah, historic memory. How about that? And then did a clay statue of Mary and a clay statue of Joseph that were going to go on either side. And he chose to make them both older. So it was Mary after Jesus had been killed. So it's again this tired old Palestinian woman in pain, right? The pain of surviving, right? And Joseph also, haggard and tired and old and it's been a life. And so I was 3 or 4 maybe at the time. No, I was a little bit older than that, probably. It was about 5. We got death threats. There were actually bomb threats to my family, and I also that was another. So that was even before desegregation. So bomb threats because Jesus looked Palestinian. Go figure. And again, like this, like what is wrong with people?
What happened
Um,
to the sculpture?
Um, it eventually got to, I mean, it was in the cathedral for decades. It eventually got taken down with the archbishop changed to someone else and they put it in a museum. So they're in a museum somewhere. I think they actually got damaged at one point too, but yeah, it was, that was right at um that was in the 70s. So that was, really radical concept that, oh my God, Jesus was not white.
One of your
Which
very
again
first
for me is
experiences
like,
is your dad just going against the tide to speak, to just show what he felt was true, to express himself, his art, and his truth.
yeah, well, and I grew up in the city of Muhammad Ali. So lots of good teachers here and lots of things going on that just made no sense and that, really shaped who I need to be. Yeah.
Would you like to close us out with another poem.
I will. This time I'll read one of my recent. Okay. I'm going to read this one, which I wrote very, very recently, a few months ago. It's called Fragments of Truth. I collect broken people whose souls glint in just the right light. When the dirt is gingerly caressed off with soft eyes and whispers, our truths prune the knotted and systemic roots from the tangled ideologies that dump them into clandestine graves, the ones lining the ravines of society. Collective genocide does that. It strangles us into fragments, shards deemed unworthy for tangible use and conformity. I must insist on creating a mosaic of folks. Each sharp, precisely imperfect piece guides my alchemist stream. We transform from dominant culture refuse into intrinsic parts of a self-evolving masterpiece, capable of creating and recreating himself at will. Mutuality is the secret superpower that uncovers the lies sold to us in bulk at bargain prices and indentures us to a structure that collapses, finally, when the mosaic is revealed.
God, what a gorgeous piece. I feel like you just encapsulated the experience of humanity. That was amazing.
Thank you.
Shannon, thank you so much for this conversation. I don't want it to end. I just want to talk and talk and listen and hear more. You are a fascinating woman and you have one hell of a story. And you're a pretty darn amazing poet too. Thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Thank you. It was such a privilege to be able to do this with you. I'm so excited. Yeah, this was really great.
Thank you so much. Catalyst, come on, jump on in, girlfriend.
So grateful to have heard your story. Like, wow. I feel stronger. Like I said at the beginning, that strong voice, I'm listening, right? I feel it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Your experiences empower me.
Thanks.
Yeah. Do we have any questions from the folks who are here with us or our guest? I want to give them the chance to express anything that they've been holding in all this time. Yeah. Thank you, C. Yeah. She's an amazing, amazing gal. Again, thank you so much for being here. I look forward to reading more of your work and hearing more of your journey. The book that you held up earlier, is that something that's available to people?
It should still be available on Amazon. It was self-published, so, and I did not know how to use the publishing platform. So it looks beautiful and it contains good words, but it's got a lot of typos. But it is on Amazon.
Can we see the cover again? It was absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah, I'm very proud of the cover.
Wild beauty breaking through the storm. S.K. Lockhart. It's
breathing through the storm. Yeah,
breathing. Sorry, it's absolutely gorgeous.
So that's one of my drawings, and it does have a couple other drawings in it. Kind of separates the wild and the beauty part. Sort of got a part one and a part two, right? One is sort of the raw Guatemala experience.
If anyone would like to follow you on social media, where are you? Where should they follow?
Well, I have a page that's SK Lockhart Poetry and Art on Facebook. I haven't updated it much. I do have an Instagram, and so some of my stuff, and I do post my art more than my poems. So Slockde, so SLOCKDE is my Instagram handle. I need to get better about that. I had a website at one point and it just kind of went to the wayside, but I want and need to get back in that.
And
So
you're also, there's some content on you on the Tesoro website as
yes,
well,
also on the test.
firesingers.com,
Yep.
right?
Yes.
Firesingers.com.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Yes.
Well, thank you again. I just want to give you like a big, like
Right?
virtual hug.
Absolutely.
You are a lovely human being and you're doing fantastic things in the world as much as you may beat yourself up over
Thank you
how
for being that gentle rebel, that kindness rebel. Like the world needs that. Every time you've been kind, it has affected us all. So thank
gentle
you.
rebel. I love that.
Yeah,
And
that might have to be a poem. Let's
yes,
see.
I love it.
Yeah. Thank
Well,
you so much.
I think this is us. I think this is the end of
Okay.
our show. But thank you again. I cannot thank you enough. I keep saying thank you, but I cannot thank you enough. Like my heart is full. This is just it, thank you.
Yeah. I'm just, yeah, I'm so thrilled. Like it's really only been in the last year that I've started to share things out, right? Other than this one little open mic. So this has been a huge step in my journey of like, okay, now I've got to put it out there, right? So learning to use my own voice, right?
I'm
I never
so
used to
glad
read.
that you are. For anyone who's ever felt like they can't make a change, that their voice can't be heard, that it isn't loud enough, strong enough, eloquent enough, whatever. Yeah, you can
Yeah,
live
yeah,
authentically and get out there and say what you have to say and do what you have to do and walk the walk.
yeah, yeah. And it's really been my kids that pushed me into that. It's like, what do I want to model for them? I don't want to model that women are silent. No. I want them to see that I have words that matter, and so do they.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this is going to close us out. Thank you, everybody,
Okay.
so much for being here. I appreciate it so much. This has been an amazing conversation. And y'all need to check this woman out. She is fire and she's got good things to say. So, yeah. Thank you so much for being a part of the Heart of the Artist
Thank you.
family.
Thank
Take
you.
care. We love you.
Thank you.
Yes.
I love you all too. Bye.
Peace, love, and poetry.
Mm-hmm.